There we go.
Well, yeah, no, it's happening. This is Stephen Spicer and myself, Carla, and with Edge. And we are going to be talking about, what's happening at Wellington United Church, but also like what are the neat things that Stephen's seen and how does he keep on innovating. So when I first met Stephen, he was telling me what was happening in the county, so Prince Edward County, and all these different the energies that were happening. And I was like, wow, you guys are doing things like 8 years, 10 years ahead of what I'm seeing across in other places in the country. And then you're like, oh yeah, and this is what's next. And well, I was like, oh my goodness. So obviously you started somewhere, you continue to see some energy, and you've kept on continuing to grow from there. But when you first came to Wellington, Stephen, like, can you tell me like what happened, or like what was the first thing that kind of started happening off the ground, and like how did that feel? Yeah, what happened?
It starts before I got here. When I realized, when I accepted the call to come here, I took some time off and I went and did some research and some homework. And I realized that Wellington was about to become a community that was going to hook its wagon all to the hospitality industry and the tourism industry. What was happening here is we were historically an area that has been known for its tourism, although that died off a long time ago, but it's now resurged because of the wineries, Airbnb industries have really allowed the hospitality industry to boom. So I went off to Niagara-on-the Lake, and I took a look at Niagara-on-the Lake and what was happening there, and realized that was going to happen here. We heard very quickly upon my arrival that the Drake Hotel was going to open here, and so we knew the landscape was changing, the neighborhood was changing. And so one of the first things we did was to get to know our neighbors, to take that fundamental theological step back and invite the neighbor in, or go to the neighbor and find out who our neighbors were. Who were they around us? How did they understand us? What did they need? What did we need? How could we engage in those conversations? We did that for about a year. And at the same time, what we were doing was taking a theological resource of what we had, what was in our building, what were in our grounds. We're graced with being on Lake Ontario. We're graced with having a giant parking lot. We're graced with having a functional building. And so we took that first year just to create deeper connections with who our neighbors were and to find out where the spaces were, what was missing, who wasn't connected that we could connect, either with our building or with some of our mission initiatives.
Wow, that's so novel. Just listening to you speak. You have actually asked about 10 times more questions than given any answers. Stephen, I thought I was the one supposed to ask you the questions. You just asked literally like 25. So I love that, is that instead of coming in with answers, you came in with so many questions, and you
Yeah,
didn't even just look where
yeah.
you were, you looked at similar context. I mean, this is probably one of the first times I've had a conversation where I even knew this part of the story, of the fact that you really started to like vision cast of where it was going. And that's not something that we can control. And so what I love is that you were like, let go of the control of, we're not going to determine exactly what Prince Edward County is going to look like,
No.
but we can ask questions about it and then respond. So when you started to respond, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think the mystery is always in the questions and never in the answers, right? Exactly. The answers are usually, this is where we want to go, and the mystery is the question is the mysterious invitation into, I wonder where we might go, kind of thing. So we started getting those answers, and one of those answers was a continual feeling that the community was disentangled. It had lost its sense of community. There were a lot of things that should be happening that weren't happening. There were a number of secular groups, Rotarians and Lions, that were doing some really great work, but very little of that was connected. So we decided one of the roles we could do was to simply be the connector. And so we started staging conversations between various groups to say, these are things that we can do, these are things you can do. How do we do them better together? One of those was the food bank. We started working collectively more with the food bank. Because what we noticed was that historically, there are a number of things that the churches used to do that have been taken over by secular institutions. Often by the same people who are sitting in the pews. So seeing that disconnection, rather than arguing about it, we decided to lift it up and to recognize it and to say, well done, good and faithful servant. If you're doing that, we don't need to do it. So that was part of that sort of theological or missional resource to say, these are the things we don't need to do because they're already being done in the community. We can lift them up. We did that in a very physical way. We have a giant electronic sign. We just started posting stuff, right? Things that were happening in the community. That's not a church sign, that's a community sign to lift up and celebrate things happening in the community. So the church somehow became, because it's in the center of the village, became that place that celebrated everything else as well as what we're doing. So we started to look at how we fill the holes and realize that we don't have to do the work. What we can do is create the connections. So we started to create connections, or what I like to call midwife. We started midwifing a lot of projects, just simply bringing people into conversation. Food bank. We developed a farmers market here in the community to give young entrepreneurs an opportunity to create their own stuff and create their own businesses. To do that, we had to put in a commercial kitchen. So we did that. So it wasn't so much that we were doing the work, we were providing the opportunities for other people to do that, because that fit within our infrastructure and our resource base more than feeling like we had to do all the work ourselves. So it was enlivening or enlifting or midwifing, whatever term you want to use, providing opportunity for others to flourish.
Right. It really sounds like Wellington United Church, although it was making the connection, it didn't have to be the center of anything, right? And like a lot of times when people think about like network weaving, they think about like hub and spoke with something in the center, but that's really not what it is. It is the connection between all the various parts that is powerful and more important and more sustainable, all these good things. So when I first came to Wellington to see what you were up to, I remember walking down the street and it was remarkable. Like every single person knew you. And so like, as you start to become this connection, what other ripple effects happened because of the connection? So it was, you've done this in an altruistic way. You didn't expect anything, but like by being that connection, what happened?
So what happened was the questions started to come back to us from other social agencies, from other individuals. And the questions were, can we? Could you? How can you help us? So for instance, we would like to do this and you have this space. Do you think we could just simply use your space? And this was not that age-old way of saying the building is so expensive, we need to find ways to pay for it. What we did in the first couple of years is we switched from looking at the building as an encumbrance to looking at our building as a mission. And that contributing to the building itself is contributing to the mission of the church in the community, because it was a resource for the community. So all of a sudden we looked at the building as an opportunity because of its space. So various entities, babies groups, senior citizens groups, food groups. We do a lot of food here. One of my focal ministries is the central ministry of Jesus, which is the banquet, which is the table, which is food missions. There are many different ways to feed people, right? Doesn't always have to be food, but it's a good place to start. So we started using the building in that way, and had to do a little bit. We had to up our own staffing resource to make that work. But because it was not just hiring a staff member, it was contributing to the mission of the church, we were able to look at the cost of that in a very, very different way. Now, one of the struggles is to get the United Church to see that in our own sort of how we contribute back to the church and get a tax break on it. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Eric and I will have that conversation one day.
Okay. So really, Wellington continues to change, right? So it continues. And so in the last,
it's huge. Yeah.
I'm going to get to COVID next, but like, as that's happened over the last few years, can you kind of talk about some of the things that have happened in and around Wellington United Church?
So in the community itself, we've seen a lot of people have left the community through age. One of our dilemmas is we don't have a housing availability for seniors once they need to downsize. Now that hopefully will become another one of our missions in the near future. We're seeing a significant change in the community in that we have more restaurants, more coffee shops, more high-end hotels are coming in. It very much is becoming a tourist destination. Wellington Beach, Sandbanks Beach, the county itself is a huge tourist destination. So we're wrestling with those tensions, right? We're wrestling with what it means to embrace the other, what it means to live in relation with people who are not always here. We've seen a significant number of people from Toronto, really what I call, and I'm writing on right now, is the Toronto diaspora, who have just left the city and come to find sanctuary in a smaller community. But they bring with them new ideas and new thoughts. And so in the congregation, we're seeing these new ideas and new thoughts influence our missions and our ministries.
Yeah.
The significant, go ahead.
I just find that remarkable as well, because often sometimes we think, oh, it's a new member or someone who just, and so the fact that you've even had the culture within your community of faith to invite someone who might have been relatively new, like that's not common either. So it's really neat how you've even fostered and said, yeah, you're new here and your voice counts.
I've always said that the moment that somebody new shows up, the context shifts and changes, and they bring a new voice and a new understanding. We have not always done it that way, as we like to say. We're constantly changing how we do things. And I think that what's interesting here is we hold in tension traditions from yesterday with traditions that are becoming, and are constantly looking at how do we speak through scripture, through our Sunday gatherings, to the changing world outside of us. How do we maintain our own relevance within this community? And I think the best way to do that is to say we are one voice among many, but we are a voice that is both interesting and speaks to the changes going on in the community.
Right.
We're rooted, and I think that rootedness helps when people come here. They look for us. They look for us being here. We might not be their theological cup of tea every day, but we definitely serve a pretty good cup of tea downstairs, and that's usually why they stay. Is because we and that's a big shift in the church as well, is we gather every Sunday afterwards and to form community. And that gathering is actually open to the whole community. It's not just church folks.
That's wonderful. So, I mean, I think everyone's probably asking, okay, this sounds pretty amazing. This whole, last 18 months, this big pandemic happened.
Yeah.
What happened at Wellington when COVID hit? How did you respond? Because with all these questions and this open-mindedness, I'm curious, what happened?
There was a significant pause, as we know. So we have relations. We've been working with a group called Mosaic, which you saw got a Juno this year. We've had folks from the Canadian Opera Company. We did significant renovations to our sanctuary to allow for a summer concert series and a summer theater series. Now the theater group has moved to another location, and that's great. We midwifed it here, and off they went to a bigger thing. The concert series hopefully will return next year, but we've lost them for the last 2 COVID summers to do that, and that's making available to the community some pretty fantastic classical music, and we've had folks from across the world come in here and play in the last 2 summers. Again, the changes to the sanctuary, including air conditioning and the removal of some things that were once thought to be sacred to make space for the new, which is a big conversation. COVID stopped all of our missions for the first bit because there was a significant amount of anxiety about coming into the building. We are in a geographic area that did the stop and start. So we closed and opened, and that was tiring for everyone. Like many congregations, we did the leap into online ministry with a pre-recorded. So my liturgical team and I got together. We did it from a distance for a while, and then we felt comfortable with each other in the sanctuary, and we started doing that. Within the third month of COVID, I realized that with the missions really not being able to work anymore, we found new ways. So we found ways to do things like many churches. We found ways to do things through telephones, through emails, things like that. We became a call center for the community immediately because uh, we had voicemail, we had secretary, we had myself here in the church. We became a linkage for the community in need. So food, access, rides. We have a lot of people living with cancer here, and so they needed rides. We started that again, midwifed it, and let it go to another community agency after we began it. We've used our parking lot to find ways to access people. So community care for seniors or other senior organizations used our drive around parking lot to hand out food and to do things. We got, we just realized the crisis, and we just sort of got, we just responded in the best way we can, knowing, and again, going back to that original thought, is we don't have to do it all, but we do have to do something. So what is it that we can do within a clear understanding of what our infrastructure is? Again, like every congregation, we're missing the people. And our hope is September 12th, when we reopen, that we will see a return of most people. I think we won't see everybody yet. So.
No, that's fair. So I think that everyone's going, oh, wow. So you became really a helpline in the community. And the fact that a community organization took that on and you midwife that so rapidly too, that's so amazing. So it seems like there's big dreams in Wellington. It seems like there's big,
Yeah.
and seems like it's such fertile ground that's really been tilled. So what's next? I think is what everyone's like, what are you guys dreaming of?
Yes. What's next? So what's next is the farmers market continues, but one of the things we've had to do is to really look at that farmers market theologically at this point in time, because it is now being run by a corporate entity, and that's creating a little bit of tension, both I think within the market and within the church body itself. We're now leasing the space to them. We're not running the market in any way uh, as a mission initiative that it was before. And so we're seeing a bit of commodification and corporatization, and that sort of sits in tension with my own theologies, and we're beginning to think that maybe we need to start thinking about how to do that market a bit differently. Um, that's just something we're wrestling with. The big thing right now, though, is housing. Is we had COVID, we lost this initiative earlier, and this is something that you and I had been talking about, was developing some properties in the area for seniors housing and becoming really the voice of that. And again, not the driver, but the person bringing everyone to the table. We had that table. That table was in discussion with our local county office here. COVID kind of pushed it sideways, and then it went in a different direction. But we've re-engaged with a developer here and are talking about developing a different piece of property, but possibly developing our own property here at the church. We have a beautiful view of Lake Ontario. It is marvelous. And the question is, why is it that a senior anyone who's living in their home and wants to downsize has to leave their community, especially a community where they can walk and don't need to drive? They can access everything they need, except for the hospital or a physician, simply by walking. Perhaps we could build that. And that's where we're in conversation, or I'm in conversation with an architectural firm in Toronto. I'm in conversation with a developer. And so we're thinking about what that might look like to maintain the church structure, but to change it a bit to provide community space and provide housing space for seniors who are downsizing from their homes.
Wow, what a vision. I love this entire conversation because I think so many times communities of faith, they think, well, I can't do something different. I can't that seems too big, that innovative thing. And maybe the word innovative feels too overwhelming. And yet from this conversation, Stephen, how you framed it is you started with questions.
Always.
Jesus asks a lot of questions. In fact, more often than not, that is actually how he teaches, is questions.
Exactly. Yeah.
We talked
And
about,
when they can't figure it out, there's a parable,
right,
right?
or there's a
Exactly.
story.
Or there's a story, right?
The
So
next,
this that sense of just saying, "Hey, asking the question, do you think we need this?" Someone says yes, and then we say, "How do we do this?"
yeah,
Right? And then all of a sudden, people are working together on this.
right,
And again, this is what we can bring to the table. And for us, it's the blessing of space and property. But we
mm,
can bring that, right? So and others can bring something else to the table. But it's asking those questions.
yeah.
And then that excites people.
No, so
Yeah,
the questions you started with, you also said then it's the connections, right? So,
exactly.
which again, congregation literally means gathering. So like it's those connections, which is like so,
Exactly.
and
Yeah,
then you just said in this last story again, is then you actually discern and reflect. So maybe like,
always.
is this what we need? Someone says yes. Well, 6 months later, is this really what we need? It may change,
Exactly.
and you're seeing that.
Good night. Yeah.
And then what I love is the last part is then continuing to ask even more questions, right? So even now, even though all of this has happened, you've given things away when you didn't need to own it, and you've made the connections where that made sense, and now you're asking these questions about, okay, what else is possible, what else is needed, and the fact that you're continuing to have that curiosity is just such a gift. So thank you, Stephen, for telling your story, and
You're
hopefully
welcome.
inspired
Yeah.
people to start asking more questions.
Keep wondering.